Hi again then guys, and welcome to another bike review from the Second Ride game, and chances are, if you're not too familiar with motorcycles in general, you might have not even heard of this bike before at all. But these occasions are always exciting because learning about something new that could be great is basically what we petrol heads in the car or the bike world tend to live for. So to me, this is something of the bike equivalent of an unsung hero, to some degree. Now, Mr Martini does a great work for society. They take bikes which are already good and then they rework them into these more bespoke creations. Think of stuff like Bertoni or Zagato, even a company like Spiker maybe, in the car world. And they do that for bikes. So a modern engine, a modern frame, but with an old school vibe. And that's exactly what this one is. In fact, it's one of the best examples of that. Now, there are a few different bikes which are essentially the same underneath as this one in Ride 2. You've also got the Flashback 2, which in all honesty is the one that I tend to use more if I'm going to. That's the one that has the front fairing and the twin headlamps and the little windshield. I like the look of that one. It has like a retro racer kind of look to it. But at the same time, this is the bike that was not featured in the series again, whereas the Flashback 2 is. And that's the only reason why I'm not reviewing that bike in this game. So, for those who don't know, what can you actually expect from this bike? Because let's be honest, if you know nothing about it, it looks like a very understated, matte black, almost like an unfinished project. So is this some kind of weird novelty thing, or is it actually good? Well, spoiler alert, yes, it is very good, because what this bike actually is a Ducati 1098 that has just been made to look like an older, almost racer-style naked bike, with a very minimal seat, very distinctive exhausts that make up most of the exposed bodywork. You've got a kind of fairing, but kind of not over the front, depending on which model you choose, as I mentioned earlier on, and of course having that Ducati motor means it's a hell of a lot more powerful than a naked bike would typically be. And that's the curious thing, because in this game they do categorize it in a very cheeky way as a naked bike. But let's be honest, this is as much of a naked bike as if you put panniers on a Ducati Desmo and call it a Tourer. Sure, technically you might be able to say that, but we all know it isn't. This is not a naked bike, it's a sport bike that happens to have less bodywork. But that cheekiness, and you could say a little bit of bias toward Mr Martini in the game by the game developers, who clearly are a fan of the brand, actually works in your favour as a rider and as a buyer as well, because as far as the bikes in the game go, these bespoke creations, even from, more mainstream manufacturers, something like a Desmo that I mentioned earlier on, they tend to be very expensive, not just in real life, but even in the game. You're looking at, like 70,000 credits, I think, for a Ducati Desmo. This, on the other hand, is actually a surprisingly reasonable 23 grand. In fact, a hair under 24,000. That's pretty much what you'd pay for something like a higher-end MV Agusta or Samba Motors anyway, except you get a bike that you can use, crucially, in the naked category, and that is a huge potential advantage to have. And the reason why is obvious. There are plenty of naked bikes that have the sheer power and torque and the larger engine, all that kind of good stuff, but many of them don't have the handling setup, the seating position, and even the driving physics, or riding physics I should say, of a sport bike, because they're not sport bikes. Because of the fact that this one is, it feels essentially like a cheat vehicle. It feels like you shouldn't be there in those naked events because it's too good. You've got 182 horsepower in this bike. That is immediately higher than most of the other stuff around. 134 Newton meters of torque, and it's not even heavy. Naked bikes typically will be a bit heavier in comparison, something like a big KTM for instance, or even a Ducati Diavel, which is one of my favourite naked bikes in the game. It's 169 kilos. That's not heavy at all. Again, sport bike underneath, that DNA really carries through, and even the performance points are only 620, which is fairly high, but not crazy high. And speaking from personal experience, there are plenty of events that you can use this bike for, as well as the other Mr Martinis, in seasonal event mode. So it's not a one-trick pony. This is absolutely not just a collector's piece. And even though for me, as I said, I do tend to use the Flashback 2 with the extra fairing on the front, because I prefer the look of it, this one is definitely as notable as that bike. That one is a little bit quicker, partially due to the fairing. This one though is every bit as good in every other way pretty much. There's not much between them, but one of the fascinating things about this bike, along with the others too, and this does surprise me quite a lot actually in comparison to the Ducatis that they're based on, is that they don't pull wheelies. One of my go-to naked bikes in this game is the big KTM, the Super Duke. But the problem with that bike is when you tune it up, it wants to wheelie all the time. Even in 4th or 5th gear, it tries to pull the front end up, and you waste a lot of time trying to back off the throttle, ease out of corners so you're not wheeling all the time and flipping off the bike. This never does that. You can pull off at red line, and it does not wheelie. It never wheelies, in fact, unless you want it to. That is not to be understated. That is a fantastic advantage to have in the naked class in particular. So essentially what you've got here is a sport bike which is on a technicality alone allowed into the naked class, with a fantastic price, bespoke style, incredible cornering physics because it's based on a sport bike, so lower centre of gravity, lower weight, no wheelies, big chunky beefy tyres, a ton of course power, torque as well, the distinctive Ducati sound, so it sounds great, it looks great. It really is a bike that ticks every box that you could need. Plus, as if all of that racing ability wasn't enough, it's a fantastic collector's piece as well. It's that and more, because it is rarer, more obscure, more bespoke, and more stylish. It's a great bike, and even though I would, contrary to what you might expect, not put it amongst my absolute favourites in the game, I still choose stuff like the KTM or the Diavel over this, purely because I like the bikes more. I will say that factually speaking, this is a pretty difficult bike to beat. What it offers, what you can use it for, and the price that they're asking, across the board it's fantastic. And once again, I'm happy that a game like Ride 2 sheds the spotlight on these lesser known bikes. For me, for instance, I'd never heard of Mr Martini before the Ride game series. There are plenty of obscure bikes that I am familiar with, but this wasn't one of them. So it's cool that they give it the love in a similar way to how Forza and Gran Turismo do for certain car brands. It's nice to see that for bikes as well, and big respect to Mr Martini for making these fantastic machines. Great choice of Ducati underneath. The 1098 is of course already a great bike, and one of the most surprising things to do with the lack of wheeling is I've got a Ducati 848 in this game fully tuned, and that thing also wants to wheelie all the time, so for this one not to do that really does feel special. So if it wasn't already clear, yes, of course, I absolutely recommend that you buy one of these. It doesn't have to be the California, but the reason why I'm reviewing the California is, as I said, this is the last time we saw it featured in the Ride series. But overall, that's it for this review. Of course, stick around on the channel for more, and until next time, I'll see you then. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.